broadcast 1, race officer speaking.
Pressure coming here, pressure coming.
We're 1.5 below.
Stand by, 2 dives here, boys.
We're looking at 10.5 to 42.
Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us again, and a massive thanks also for your feedback. Love to know who's listening and if you're enjoying what you're hearing. Hopefully you all listened to Kenny Reid Part 1 and are back for Part 2 of the blockbuster, the sequel. If not, and you're a Kenny Reid fan, you might want to scroll back and give Part 1 a go. It's full of great anecdotes from his time with the mighty Dennis Conner in the America's Cup world, and you've got to love a bit of that. Moving on with this episode, Kenny broadens his horizons with the Volvo Ocean Race and all the highs and lows that brings. And he talks about those early, rather scary days on the massive Super Maxi Comanche. But perhaps more than in Part 1, here you really start to appreciate what's quite unique about Kenny. He's very much one of the boys on the boat, loyal and competitive. And yet, he's still commanding in the boardroom. He's as warm and approachable on the sail-off floor as he is at ease with the billionaire owner. He's naturally very self-deprecating, yet seems to ooze an enviable confidence. Perhaps that's his charm. Would I want to be on his team? Every day. I hope you enjoy Part 2 of the time I spent with Kenny Reid.
I didn't want to go do another windward leeward race. I wanted to go try to sail around the world. All of a sudden, we're doing the Volvo with a dream sponsor. There's only 2 types of people in the Southern Ocean: people who thrive in it and people who are trying to get to the end of it.
I mean, Kenny, your career hasn't been all about inshore racing. I mean, the Volvo was calling, wasn't it? I mean, firstly, with a few legs on Ericsson, what was your memories of that? I mean, such an alien world.
Yeah, that was a weird deal where, the Ericsson program, what year was it? It was the time, I think it was 2005 when ABN AMRO won the race overall. And Ericsson went into the regatta with grand expectations, and they weren't living up to it. So whenever a program isn't living up to expectations, there's crew movement. You can always tell who's doing well, whether it's a Cup or a Volvo or any sort of Grand Prix program, is that the crew stays the same throughout the programs. And sure enough, there's a lot of turnover. And Ericsson had made it around to Rio, and they were coming up, and all of a sudden John Kostecki is the skipper, and Roscoe's on board. Still the same core group. Neil McDonald, of all credit, was taken as the skipper and moved off to, he was a watch captain, but I actually always gave Neil heaps of credit for sticking that out. It was not easy, and I forget what John Kostecki was going to do, but he announced, actually, I think halfway up during that leg, that was his last leg on the boat, or his last or maybe even only leg on the boat, and he was stepping off. Actually, once they got into Annapolis, he announced that he was stepping off, and I remember talking to somebody. I was in my office in Portsmouth, Rhode Island, at our loft, and I don't know who was. It could have been Dan. I forget. I forget who was next door to me at the time. And I leaned over. I said, "I bet I get a phone call here soon." And they're like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, I just don't. On short notice, general proximity. I don't even know Neil McDonald at this stage. I don't know if there's a lot of people that they can get to kind of fill a role that it sounds like Kostecki or Neil were doing on the boat." And it was literally 5 minutes later, Neil McDonald's on line 1. "Hey, what do you think about doing a couple legs on the Volvo?" And I said, right there on the spot, without talking to anybody, without talking to my family, I said, "Listen, I'll do it." I think it really surprised them. I said, "I'll do it, but I want to do the rest of the race. I want to become part of the team. I want to really sense this thing, get a feel for it, and see if it's something that I enjoy." And quite frankly, the first leg up from Annapolis to New York, it blew 40 on the nose, and at one stage I'm up driving. It was windy and it was nasty, and right off the coast of New Jersey, and all these guys are they're all down below, and there's half the crew, 3/4 of the crew smoke cigarettes. They're all smoking cigarettes down below, and I'm up driving on deck by myself. I think Richard Mason is giggling at me upstairs. He's like, "How do you like being a Volvo sailor?" You know, and that was the beginning. The next leg is when Movie Star sank, and you know, the young ABN team lost a sailor, and Hans Horowitz, and it was like, whoa, welcome to the Volvo. That was a brutal leg, and on those boats, on those early canting keel boats, the creaks and groans. I remember I was in my bunk at one stage, and I lean over to Mason, and I'm like, "Hey, Richard, is this normal?" He goes, "We'll be fine." And the whole center of the boat is moving around and crashing down waves, and I'm like, holy Christ, I don't know if this is for me, but it's amazing how the human mind forgets. And by the time I was at the end of the race, I'm like, I think I'm kind of hooked here. And as stupid as it sounded, and as crazy as it sounded, through all that adversity, I didn't want to go do another windward leeward race. I wanted to go try to sail around the world. It was phenomenal. The transformation was phenomenal.
What was it? What was the thing that got you?
I think the 2003 Cup really burned me out. You know, and then I remember Dennis telling me in a dark day, Dennis said, "You know, you're not even the best Etchell sailor on this boat. You know, this is when we weren't doing well." I'm like, you know what? Screw you. And I think we won every race at 100 boat Etchell's Worlds that next year. So all of a sudden, I found myself sailing not because I wanted to win or not because I wanted to lose. I was trying to prove something, and I didn't like that feeling. As successful as that Etchell's Worlds was, I was trying to prove something, and I didn't like that in myself. It was time to flick the switch, and that's where the Volvo came in. And Neil McDonald, that phone call came at an incredibly, well, I joke with people, it either came at an incredibly weak moment or an opportune moment. It was time for me to switch things up.
I mean, you did, didn't you? After Ericsson, you got the dream team together with a great campaign for Puma. I mean, what an amazing sponsor to have. How cool are they? How did all that come together?
Yeah, sailing the Maxi Worlds on a boat called All Smoke, and I didn't even know it. Adam Ostenfeld got me on the boat, old legend Stars and Stripes trimmer, you know, from 1987, and we went and sailed with a wonderful gentleman named Gunther Hertz, and at the end of we were sailing his I think it was an 80-foot, kind of mini maxi, and we won our class in the event, which was very cool. And Gunther, every crew dinner wanted to know more about these crazy Ericsson stories. I'd already done the Ericsson thing. Tell me more stories. Tell me more stories. He was fascinated by it. I'm like, wow, this cool guy. He just kind of, maybe I'm good at selling stories. Turns out he was the majority interest in stockholder in Puma. And he's like, you know what? Puma's continually looking for new sports, especially new sports that they can leverage immediately, that they're not going to compete against Nike or Adidas in. And he goes, this Volvo thing sounds just crazy enough for Puma to think about. I'm like, great, you know, let me know, whatever. And 3 months later, I get a phone call from Jochen Zeitz, and he was the CEO at the time. He goes, Gunther says, we got to do the Volvo, or we should look at doing the Volvo, and you're the guy. I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? And again, it started this snowball of all of a sudden we're doing the Volvo, and with a dream sponsor. It's a sponsor that I learned more about business and marketing and relationships from than you ever could imagine. It was like a PhD in trying to reach out to the world. Puma, they were high flying at the time, and I told our team every day, we're now sneaker salesmen. And that's what I learned. We became sneaker salesmen. We weren't Volvo sailors, we were sneaker salesmen.
How comfortable were you with all of that? I mean, you're running the program, it's big budget, you're in charge of these people and their lives. You got this demanding sponsor. You know, how comfortable were you taking on all of that?
Well, the sponsor, I would call the sponsor anything but demanding. Antonio Bertone, who was head of marketing for all of Puma, turned into a wonderful friend, as did Jochen, and they couldn't have been more supportive. They loved us because we were one of their sports teams that they could actually talk to, relate to. They weren't dealing with big contracts and you know, people who represented you and all that stuff. It was like real world. And I think Jochen went to every single stopover, and Antonio was almost at every stopover. Wonderful friend, Antonio, even through the whole thing. So there was no pressure there whatsoever. But you know, picking Botin at the time was a big ask.
The designer,
yeah. And Marcelino and Adolfo, they busted their butt. You know, we had a good boat. We didn't have a great boat. We had a good enough boat. We got a couple breaks. You know, Bauer put Telefonica up on the rocks. We were tight. We were neck and neck. Ericsson was in a whole different league with a two-boat, really highly funded campaign. But I think to come in second in that event showed something. And the party in St. Petersburg, Russia, I remember being exceptionally hungover the next day, and Jochen saying, we're going out to breakfast. And at breakfast, he said, we're doing this again, right? And the last thing as a Volvo sailor you ever want to hear is, you got to go sail around the world again. You've just, A, you've lived, B, nobody got hurt. You know, you didn't have to, that to me was the dread, is to have to make a phone call. Your husband, your father, your son is not coming home. Never had to make that call. You know, just pure sailing again. For me, it was pure. Hard, you know, there were hard times. The Volvo is really peaks and valleys. There are wonderful times and there are ruthlessly hard times. And
like what? Tell us some of that
we weren't
story.
doing. We had a couple. We had crew problems, especially about halfway around the world. I'm the first to admit now, I didn't have any idea what I was doing. You know, I was, fortunately, I found Kimo Worthington early on, and he helped me run the program and became, you know, one of my better friends in the whole world. And Kimo, Kimo was the glue that kept the whole program together. But, you know, I learned a lot from that. I didn't know enough about it, so I had to create an all-star team. I had to bring in a bunch of people that, frankly, I met for the first time during their first interview, that had legendary names, and you know, an all-star team never really works until I got more confidence. I think if you show a little bit of lack of confidence as the leader, as it turns out, it's easy for people to start picking at you. And I wasn't good enough. I wasn't good enough, and some of the guys in the boat were doubting me, I think, and we went through a wonderful first part of the race, and then we had a tough middle part of the race. We had to make some tough decisions, and Jochen was right there with me. I talked to him on the phone a lot about the situation. He even offered to resign at one stage. He's like, no, you're my guy. I said, oh, well, okay. And so we made some pretty radical moves, and you know, Earl Williams and Rob Greenough. Earl, who I'd sailed with a ton in the past, Rob really turned into a key part of the team. You know, Kirby was on board. Towards the end, we maybe, and nothing against the crew, but maybe we weren't that all-star team anymore. We were more of a gang of people who kind of started to believe in each other. And all of a sudden, toward the end of the race, I think we had a 2-2-1-2. And the two, going into St. Petersburg, we were lost by a boat length, literally a boat length. We did good things at the end. I was really proud of how that campaign, and so sure enough, Jochen's like, let's go, we're doing it again. And I'm just hung as a dog, and I'm like, no, we're not doing it again. Are you kidding me? No.
Well, you did do it again. We'll touch on that in a second. But I guess you watch that race from the outside, and you know, you imagine when I ask you the toughest moments, it's going to be kind of, you know, Southern Ocean, scared, blah, blah. But actually, the toughest moments is to do with team and
no
people
question.
And communicating.
And to this day, you know what? I talk to a lot of those. And by the way, and you're in a bond forever, right? So when you go through hell on the water with a group like that, I think any Volvo sailor, same thing, you talk to the Vendée guys and any of these extreme offshore sailors, there is a bond, because the bond is cemented by the times you have with your crew on board the boat, but it's also cemented by the knowledge that you are the only safety net for the rest of the fleet, and that I got your back. So I'm trying to beat the hell out of you on the water, but I remember talking to Bauer in the middle of the Southern Ocean, and they broke their headstay on Telefonica the first time around. I'm like, you sure? You know, he's like, no, we're going to keep going. The headstay is gone, but we're just going to keep up our furling sails. And we're emailing back and forth. I'm like, check in, just keep checking in. You know, you got, I can't tell you how many times people either checked in on us or we would check in on others. Hey, you're parked. You okay? Everything good? Yeah, we're okay. Nobody's giving up their secrets. And there were times where, yeah, it's just a bond. And you go to a cocktail party with all the Volvo teams, and you spend the whole night with other teams because you're just shooting the breeze, because you're living, you know how hard the other people are working. And it's just an incredible respect. It's just a really cool thing.
I asked Kyle Langford, you know, what was it really like in the Southern Ocean? It was his first time, the last ocean race. You know, and he said, it is no place for a human. Yeah. How would you're good with words, Katie, you know, how would you describe what it's actually like?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I can, I would say, first of all, Kyle is right. The Southern Ocean there's only two people in the Southern Ocean, two types of people. People who thrive in it and people who are trying to get to the end of it. And I think I was a person trying to get to the end of it. I didn't thrive in the Southern Ocean. You're so far, you just feel alone. You're so far away from anything. It's so gray. A lot of the days are so gray. The waves are so big, especially the second time. You know, Brad Jackson, who was one of our very key guys in the second campaign, right before the start. The problem with weather these days is you know how bad the potential is for your next leg or for your next day. I was never nervous in the middle of a storm. I was always nervous leading up to it, because it's like, oh, this is going to suck. You know, this is going to be a really hard couple of days. Well, we knew when we left Auckland and the second time around, we were going to have 10 really bad days. And this storm, we went through a cold front the first night, had a really windy front the first night, and then had a light air transition into a massive circulation. I think that other parts of the world would call essentially a hurricane, you know, and we had 3 guys in the bunk, 2 drivers, and Casey Smith, who's kind of our glue, all injured and in the bunk. You know, John O'Swain's elbow was the size of a small, you know, of a volleyball, you know, and so 3 of us drove for, you know, I can't remember how long until finally Jono got back on deck. But anyway, there was one night, and Brad and Tony Mutter were really good at this. They knew when to say, hey, time to pull the throttle back a little bit, and we throttled back. Groupama throttled back, and everybody else kept the hammer down, and the other 3 boats almost sank that night. They all limped into Chile, all completely busted. Ourselves and Groupama were the only 2 that got around the horn, you know, without having to stop. It was, you know, it's real down there, man. It's real, and it's and especially when you're sucked into one of these big storms like that. There's no way out, and and that's where I think the camaraderie still comes back into effect. Ian broke before he left Auckland, essentially, and he was 1,000 miles behind. I'm like, man.
Ian Walker on Abu Dhabi.
I don't know. That must have been really hairy, because now that is real exposure. At least we had the other boats around us, meaning within a couple 100 miles. He was exposed, and sure enough, they broke, and they ended up in Chile as well. So it's just, listen, it's a different mentality, and it's a different world, and you're in that make it through it mentality, or I thrive it mentality. And there are some people that thrive in the Southern Ocean. I think I'd rather stick with a make it through, because it proves maybe I'm slightly sane.
Not that soon, because obviously you did it again, but I guess the second time you're back with the same sponsor, you can pick your own team, you know what to expect, you've done a lap. You know, how different did that second campaign feel?
Yeah, completely. From day one, completely different. And you're right, the knowledge, you know, what you didn't know in the first race, well, there's no excuses in the second race. And yeah, a broken hanger pin on a D1, you know, on the first leg. You know, our training schedule was great. Juan and Juan's design team were fantastic. You know, we had our own build team that worked out of the New England Boat Works facility right down the street from where we set up shop in Newport. You know, so I was home, and we had this hand-picked team, and really fun working with Juan. I really enjoyed that. And you know, we were a pre-race, you know, we were clearly one of the favorites. You know, there was a few teams that were, well, I think all the teams had probably a place in that pre-race favorite, but we were no slouches. And, you know, halfway through, you know, we were, I think, 10 miles behind Telefonica at the time. A couple boats, Abu Dhabi obviously busted their rig, not even 24 hours into the race. Sonia almost busted their boat 24 hours into the race. This is all in the Med. Groupama took a left turn to go down the coast, and they were literally hundreds of miles behind. And Camper kind of took a left turn. They bailed out, but they were over 100. So we had a good second place going, and we were going to have a good fight with Iker Martinez and their whole group into Cape Town, and ripping along, and everything's great, and bang. And that bang changed my life. The experience on Tristan da Cunha, I think, changed all of our lives. But to go from a pre-race favorite, that was destructive. I mean, to say we were down is an understatement. I've never seen Casey Smith raise his voice, but we had a good kind of a sob session the first night we got into Tristan da Cunha. Like, what the hell just happened? How could we have prevented this? How could we have done better? What do we do? What were our mistakes? And there were some tough words said, and but you know what? That team galvanized. It took us a couple legs to galvanize, but we had one meeting. You know, we still weren't doing great in China. There was a little bit of dissension. It wasn't great. We were having a team meeting, and everybody was expecting me to come in and say, we're not fast enough, you know. And I came in, and it was a big leadership day. I came in and put my hand up and said, tactically, we're not good enough. That's where we got to make big changes. And Tommy Addis and I kind of changed how we did things. And I'm kind of an exaggerator by nature. My mother was an exaggerator, and he's like, you got to stop exaggerating. It like supposedly bugged the shit out of him, and good for him. We had a down and out, and as a leader, I learned a lot. You got to let people speak, and you got to listen to when they do speak. And we changed how we did things, and from then on, we were great. I mean, we had a chance at winning the thing after having a busted rig, and you know, coming down to the end, a bunch of boats had a chance of winning, but we were right back in the hunt, and I was very proud of that. That was pretty cool.
Some moments in life, isn't there, where it's a moment to step up, and I just wonder, you know, there was so much expectation in that campaign, and the rig falls down, you're miles from anywhere, you have to motor forever to some island in the middle of nowhere. After
thumbing to an oil tanker to get enough diesel fuel to get there in the first place.
And I mean, I can imagine how hard that time was, but you're the leader of that team. They're looking to you, Kenny, to change this. How hard was that?
Oh, it was brutally hard. And I'm sure if I went back and did it all over again, I'd do a lot of things different, but we made it through. Might have taken a leg or two to kind of snap out of it, you know, to kind of get out of that hangover. But fortunately, it was a veteran team, a lot of people on board the boat with a lot of respect for one another. And I think other teams, you know, it was crushing. Just to make the next start was amazing. The shore team and what Chemo did, and Tim Hackett and that whole group to get a rig, fly a rig to Cape Town for Chemo and our sponsors, you know, Håkan Svensson and Antonio Håkan from Berg Propulsion and Antonio Bertone, for them to fund a ship to come pick us up in the middle of the ocean, put us on the ship, take us back to Cape Town, get the rig in with 24 hours to go, and to start the race, to start the next leg. It meant we were still in business. We were still in the race, and it was a pretty phenomenal team that way.
When you look back at your time in the Volvo Ocean Race, what do you remember it for?
Oh, well, I remember the camaraderie. I really enjoyed the camaraderie. I remember how hard it was to continue to push yourself. But like any competitive sailor, it sounds terrible, but I remember the mistakes more than I remember. I remember what we could have done better, what I could have done better. You better learn from your mistakes. I think learn from your mistakes is a way more important fact of life than even your greatest achievements. So, what was
your big takeaway from that?
Oh, it's a million. I don't think there's anything. Well, I made a mistake. I got a little cocky on choosing the rig, and I'm not making anything out to who we chose it from, but I had a good thing with North Technology Group, and we had some. We had some ways that we convinced ourselves that we could make a better rig using the Hall spars technique at the time. And I can't help but thinking, by the way, this is nothing against Hall spars. And by the way, the mast didn't break because of Hall spars either. But does the chain of events that set off that created a little, like 2.5-inch hanger pin that connects the D1 to the mast made out of the wrong stainless steel, it just set a chain of events in place that had catastrophic race losing ramifications. So I think I learned more than anything else, don't think too hard,
Too much risk.
Yeah, it wasn't even risk. I had a good thing. I had a good thing going with my team at North Technology Group, and we had all the sales and all the package, but we chose to leave the nest for that, and I do. And again, it had nothing to do with who we chose. This was a freak situation where I think a human error, a human who was actually not even part of the mass manufacturing, a completely outside resource, made a little stainless piece that was out of the wrong stainless, and the metal people said it was always going to break. It wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. And I struggle with that. I think about it almost every day, actually. Yeah.
You came back from that lap of the planet, and Tom Whidden gave you a new job, didn't he? Promoted you to president of North Sales. I mean, happy days. What did you feel about that at the time?
Well, it was kind of it was a big transition happening. Terry Kohler had decided to sell the company. Peter Dubins was becoming involved. I took about 3-4 months off, but kept my hand in it, of course. And really the conversation with Peter and I was, I hear you're the guy. So we'd like you to do this role. And the conversation was quite different with Tom. It was it's time to stop playing. It's time to get serious. And I was ready, especially after a Volvo. You can't have enough time off after a Volvo to not think I'm tired and I don't have to do this anymore. But Comanche came along and other cool projects. They don't stop. The cool projects came along. But Tom said, no more America's Cups, no more Volvos. It's time to be a big boy, and if you're going to do this job, you got to do this job. And that's where we still are today. And it was the right decision at the time. I wouldn't change a thing. It was the right decision then. It's the right decision now. And it was, it's pretty. It turns out it was another great moment in a career full of lucky, phenomenal. I consider myself the luckiest guy on the planet, and it was another lucky, phenomenal moment. We never didn't trust that boat, We had all the reason to. It was just insane. We do have to bring new people into the sport of sailing, so if we don't try to reach out to that group, we're not doing our job.
There was still exciting projects, though. I mean, Comanche, of course, the giant 100-foot maxi monohull. I mean, she turned heads everywhere you took her. I mean, it looked and felt like a whole load of trouble. How extreme was she?
Well, at the time, it was quite extreme, of course. But you know what? We came up with. I always tell Juan. Juan was designing Rambler at Rambler '88 at the time, and you know, Juan, because I had such a good experience with him, he likely would have been my first candidate to do something like that. You know, Jim Clark, I'd gotten to know through sailing J-boats with him, and he decided, you know, what the heck, let's go try to break some records. He wanted to own a sports team, really, and a sailing sports team. And his sailing team that sailed on Hanneman and on Comanche were his sports team. So I remember calling up Juan and just saying, hey, listen, George David is an old friend, and I'm not. George has already long had launched his campaign. And I tried to talk Jim out of building the boat. I'm like, well, this is crazy. What do you want to do this for? He goes, no, actually, Neville Crichton down in Australia, Jim and Christy went to Australia every year for Christmas. And Neville Crichton, who was sailing all the Alfa Romeos at the time, he knew Jim and kept saying, come on, when are you going to join the party? And that's the way Jim tells the story. When are you going to join the party, Jim? You got to get a 100-footer. And the day he said, I want to do this, and he said, Neville Crichton better be careful what he wished for, you know. But Neville had just decided to get out of it. Sure enough, Jim Clark, go big or go home, and you know, Rambler was already well underway, and I didn't want to interfere with George's project. I tried to talk Jim out of it because I'm like, you have no idea how hard and how crazy this is going to be and how costly it's going to be. Sure enough, he's like, nope, we're going to do this. Let's go. It's like, oh my God, here we go. And it was cool. It just tapped into the old team, the old build team, and had them run the build. And as long as, you know, when Casey and Tim Hackett are confident, then I'm confident. The build team and the design team with VPLP and Guillaume Verdier just brought a new life to all of us again. The kind of that crazy French mentality of, yeah, we don't have to do it that way. Yeah, but it worked for us. Essentially, we all talked one day. It's like, we got to stop saying it worked for us in the Volvo, because this is not the Volvo. This is a whole different world. And Guillaume and all the guys at VPLP were wonderful to work with. And I had the shore team and the build team that I trusted. We never didn't trust that boat, you know. We had all the reason to. It was just insane. Except for one day we took you sailing.
You say that, I'm just about to bring that up. I mean, I remember we sailed with you. Do you remember that day in Sydney Harbour? You know, she was so brand new, and it felt like from the moment we got on, it felt so intimidating, almost as if, you know, the boat was in charge of us. Almost. I mean, was there a moment, Kenny, where you felt, I think we might have been a bit too punchy?
Well, that was a moment in time, and we were just leaving the heads in Sydney Harbour, and just to go out practicing one day, and it was windy, and there were big breaking. I'm sure you remember big breaking waves at the heads. Jimmy Spithill sailed that race with us; he was on board, and Kimo was there, and our whole team, you know, good people on board the boat, the best, you know, and everybody looked at each other like, yeah, we're not ready for this yet, and. Listen, Jim was another one with expectations. And I think if we had busted the boat before the race started, and that was a boat busting day, my mentality was I would have rather busted the boat in the race, because at least it was for purpose, than bust the boat before the race started. And we, like you said, we had 3 days on the boat back in Rhode Island, and then we delivered the boat down to Charleston, stuck it on a ship, brought it to Sydney, and sailed it for, 2.5 weeks, of which we got blown out for half the days. And fresh is the understatement of the century. We had no idea.
Be honest with me, Kenny, because always on the boat, we're there, we've got the camera, we're filming away, and you've put a bit of a face on, but that day was a moment. What did you actually think?
No. A few of us got out of your camera, by the way, very purposely. What the hell have we done? Like, we're just wondering, could Wild Oats have gotten out through that? I mean, it was big breaking waves. And it's like, Jesus, we don't know how to, and we spent the next couple of days talking about how to slow it down, not to speed it up. All of a sudden, after that day, our mentality really changed. It's like, we get the mainsail all the way on the boom, but that big fat head is still up. We put a reef point so we could actually sheet the fat head part of the mainsail so we wouldn't have to get a guy up the mast. And that was a changing moment. But like any boat, we talked about this in this America's Cup talk tonight, sailors always prevail. So you just get used to it. As silly as that sounds, what was a scary slam when a boat was new, before you know it is run of the mill. And not to say that we sailed in a lot of big breaking waves like that on that boat, but that boat became literally easy to sail. As silly and as insane as that sounds, when you put the talent on a boat like that we had the talent for, there was nothing. The Bermuda race, where 30% of the boats didn't start, the whole Grand Prix division didn't start because of the weather forecast. It wasn't talked about for a single second that we weren't going to do that race, because we trusted the boat, we trusted the team, we trusted our ability to reef, we trusted everything at that stage. Break the transatlantic record, break the 24-hour record, break this record, break that record. You know what? That's what the boat's made for. That's what Jim's expecting. That's what we're expecting. Let's go.
But back then it was exciting, wasn't it? I mean, what was she like? Do you remember that race? What was she like, fully lit up in the Bass Straits?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we had a super long transition. Like the Sydney Hobart, as it goes, is defined by the transition between fronts, between a southerly buster coming in or something like that. And it was windy upwind, and it was going to transition to fairly kind of medium breezy downwind. But that transition took, 8 hours, and that 8 hours was in the notorious Bass Strait, of which we essentially were becalmed across and watched Wild Oat sail away. So the beginning of the race was quite windy, upwind, not quite windy, windy enough upwind to give us a taste for it. The end of the race was just kind of fun downwind sailing. And we never had that light up moment, and we learned a lot about the boat. The transition, we had to figure out how to make it better in light air, because Wild Oats literally sailed away in light air. Back to the drawing board, boys, and Jim was the best at, okay, here's the next project, here's what we got to do. Guillaume, all the young guys at VPLP, what are we going to do? How are we going to change this? And it's just boom, let's go, let's get into it, let's go next. And I think that was the only race we ever, only offshore race we ever lost, boat for boat, because we just kept making changes, and Jim had his sports team, and he wanted his sports team to win.
We're going to get off sailing in a sec, but most fun boat you've sailed?
I would say so, because it didn't have that crazy pressure of a cup or a Volvo race. It just had this. The only pressure was the pressure we put on ourselves to perform at the top end of the boat. And I think we were always more mad, no matter if we broke a record or not, we were always mad, like, hey, we could have done this, we could have done this. But it was a great group and a great team. And, Casey Smith and I have done a lot of miles together. And so 2 times around the planet, plus the whole Comanche campaign. And, I miss Casey. He's working for American Magic now. He's on their shore team. He's actually in charge of their hydraulics. And I wonder if American Magic realizes that the best sailor in their program is driving a tender half the days. So Casey, if you're listening to this, I miss sailing with you, big guy.
Off the water, Kenny, we often find you involved in broadcasting as well. I mean, you had a key role as lead expert commentator from the Cup in Bermuda. I mean, obviously it's a role, I've been known to dabble in a bit myself, but how challenging did you find it?
So, it started in San Francisco, and Russell was looking to kind of change up the commentating team. And Antonio Bertone, it kind of goes back to Puma again. Puma was the licensed apparel sponsor for Oracle in that campaign. And as legend goes, Antonio tells it this way anyway. Antonio wants to take credit for all this stuff. So he said he's sitting there talking to Russell, and Russell's like, I want to change some stuff up on television. What do you think? And Antonio said, well, you should talk to Kenny Reed. He can talk his way out of anything. He can talk his way through anything. And he's like, really? So he called me and he said, would you ever be interested? And it turns out they had a contest. They invited, did you go out and interview with them? So I didn't have a good feel for what they were doing beforehand. And all of a sudden I'm in San Francisco and Randy Smythe was there when I was there. And I think they interviewed like 8 or 10 people. And the way they did it with me, tell me if it was the way they did it with you, is Todd Harris was there. And Todd was going to be the lead. And they wanted a color commentary to work with Todd Harris. And Todd Harris literally knew he knew less than zero about sailing. Wonderful guy. I thought he picked it up quickly, and he could run a TV show. I mean, he could run a TV show. He'd be sitting there watching his kids' soccer scores while he's got people shouting in his ears and just run. He could fluidly run a TV show. So what they did with me anyway was they stuck me in a room with Todd, and they put an old broadcast up on the screen and said, have at it, boys. And for some reason, Todd and I, we hit it off in 2 seconds. I mean, we actually had each other laughing in the middle of this broadcast. And according to, again, as legend goes, they were like, I don't think it had anything to do with whether I was good or bad at it. I think the guys, Dennis, just thought we had a chance of getting good because we clearly liked each other right there on the spot. They could tell that there was a camaraderie. And yeah, that San Francisco, Todd said at the end of the San Francisco Cup, of course, the legendary comeback, he said, quit. He said, don't ever do this again because it's never going to get any better, and just quit right now. Stop broadcasting. Don't ever broadcast for sailing again. And of course, I wasn't that smart, but Bermuda was also a phenomenal experience.
Although, I remember in the build-up to Bermuda, and I guess, Russell Coates is really into the TV product. I mean, he properly watches it and analyzes it. And if you're a commentator or you're any kind of the talent team, he's very much on your case. And I remember sitting in a discussion with the commentary team from one of the World Series events that you were commentating on. And there was a lot of chat, wasn't there, about vocabulary, saying left of screen or right of screen as opposed to port or starboard. And it's really tricky. And I remember you were getting a hard time from Russell about this. I mean, how much did you feel, God, that it was an important job, I guess?
Yeah, you're right. Russell is, to his credit, I think he kind of promised Larry and the rest that we're going to make a difference and we're going to try something different and we're going to try to make it good. And he took it personal, and it was always great. When he came down after a day of racing, you knew there was going to be some good criticism and some bad criticism, but he was going to call a spade a spade. So I enjoyed it. I appreciated it. And as far as, what I learned very quickly was the sailing world wants you to use technical terms and wants you to treat their sport with the utmost respect and historical respect. And, if somebody's pulling on the Cunningham, you got to say they're trimming the Cunningham, whereas the rest of the world, who they're trying to attract, is like, what the bleep is a Cunningham? So you had to learn. To me, the hardest part, but I think the part I'm most proud of, is to learn how to talk to average people, but at the same time, don't lose your core constituency. And that's where he pushed us really hard. And that's where Todd was great, because Todd didn't know anything. I mean, toward the end, Todd was getting in trouble because he'd say, they're going to do a jibe set around this mark, aren't they, Kenny? And at the end of the day, Russell comes running in. He goes, I don't want you ever to use the word jibe set again. You don't know what a jibe set is. You're to talk to the average people and tell them just what sailing is or what's going on in the race course. It was hilarious. So it is. It's, as you know, better than all of us to try to. You got to treat the sport with respect and treat your core fan base with respect. Don't talk too stupid to them because they're not stupid. They know if you're trying to make them out to be an idiot. But at the same time, we do have to bring new people into the sport of sailing. So if we don't try to reach out to that group, we're not doing our job.
I mean, I know I'm kind of biased because, you know, I like to storytell, and I obviously we work in broadcasting, but, you know, I just think it's vital for the growth of our sport, you know, getting a good broadcast package. You know, where do you see our sports currently, I guess, and, you know, are we in good shape, do you think? You know, you're a key stakeholder in the whole industry,
Yeah.
Kenny.
Well, certainly. Listen, we've done all kinds. We're not growing, and that's a fear in its own right. In any sort of business world, if you're not growing, you can make a case you better shrink way back again and start again. You know, but of course we're not going to do that. I think there's a lot of people here at the Yacht Race Forum. There's a lot of people trying to tick that box of how do we reach out to a bigger, broader public. A lot of people trying to create these, you know, SailGP is the perfect example of trying to reach out to outside of the comfort zone of sailing. We have to do it. At North Sails, we talk about it all the time. At North Technology Group, we talk about it all the time. How can we reach out? You know, Stan's initiative where he's going to try to maybe use his smartphone to tell us the rules on board. So red light, green light smartphone. So you're in a beer can series, and all of a sudden you can learn the rules simply by, whoops, red light just came up on your phone. Oh, we got to do a circle. We made a mistake. Well, then we can check in on the app after the race and figure out what we did wrong, make starting simpler, whatever the case may be. We got to try something. We got to keep trying stuff until something works. Kids, one of the statistics today that I heard from one of the groups was there's like 600,000 kids sailing opties or something obscene. That could be don't quote me on that.
That might have been the representative from the Opie
Yeah,
Association.
it could have been. But by the time they're graduating on, there's only like 6,000 that actually continue on with the sport. Maybe it's 60,000 to 6,000 or something like that. It could be 600. But just the fact that we're losing that many kids at such a short period of time. I'm writing an article for Seahorse. I read an article for Seahorse. I think we got to fundamentally change how we treat a sailboat race. I think we have the technology now to tell you. I am so sick of sitting on the water waiting for wind to come up all day long. The amount of man hours or woman hours wasted waiting for the wind to come up. Tell us the night before by looking at your app and get on SailFlow or Predict Wind, because they're unbelievably good now, and tell us what time the race is going to start tomorrow. So I can hang out with my kids and go to a soccer game in the morning if we're going to start at 2, or if the dying northerly is going to go away and there's not going to be any breeze in the afternoon, I'll start the race at 8 in the morning. Tell us the night before. Let's stop wasting everybody's time. It's really frustrating. And the sport has to fundamentally change to say there's other people who are trying to get the time of the people sailing, of the owners sailing, of the crews sailing. It's time that we respect people's time and actually use the technology that's available to utilize their time freshly and refreshingly. And I don't know, I really hope I can get some people. New York Yacht Club, I'm really pushing to try to do this flex timing for a day of racing. It's just time. We got to do something.
I mean, I can tell you are as well, but I'm fundamentally worried about the sport, and it's a sport we're passionate about. You know, where do you see the future? And I guess how urgent is it to make some changes? Well,
it's urgent to keep up with the times, and that's what I think it is about this potential flex scoring system. If it's and the other thing is the perfection of a race course and the perfection of a windward-leeward race course. Guess what? If it's 20 degrees bias to the leeward end, if you can't make the start on starboard tack, send them. Tough. Start on port. Just start. Just go. The perfection of the starting line, because we all ping one end and we give people a hard time if it's 3 degrees bias to one end, it doesn't matter. Utilize the time. Get people racing. We could do twice as many races in the course of a weekend if we weren't trying to make the weather mark perfectly upwind. Guess what? If we reach to the weather mark every once in a while, reach the weather mark and you know what? The best sailor is still going to win. If we do a downwind start every once in a while, I did 2 around the world races because I got sick of windward-leeward racing. Well, the perfection of creating a race course has to stop. Just send them. If it's blowing 3, guess what? Send them. If it's blowing 28, either don't go out or learn how to reef. Don't waste our time. Please stop wasting our time. Take the postponement flag, throw it in the bin. If you take us out there, we're starting the race.
I can tell you're writing an article.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't need to read it now.
Well, yeah,
But
still buy Seahorse magazine, please, because it's coming.
The reality, Kenny, though, is that all of that detail is not going to revitalise the sport that we've grown up with and are absolutely passionate about. I don't know. It needs a kick.
Well, kids, affordable boats. What do we do with old plastic boats? You know, there's a lot of old plastic boats. It leads into the whole green initiative that our industry has to take up. But the bottom line is, we all say this, but when you have a good sailing day, for grizzled veterans, I'll speak for myself. I might throw you into that mix. There's still nothing like it, right? You come in off a great day on the water. It's like, where else would you rather have been today? And so that, I think people are still passionate. They just want, I do really fundamentally think a big change is, please respect my time. And especially owners, you know, think of some of these big regattas. And again, I'll use the New York Yacht Club as an example. We go out on spring, you know, the spring regatta. It's the longest standing regatta in North America. I think 156 years or something in June every single year. And you think of a postponement for 2 hours, and you look around the fleet, and there's titans of industry. Oh my God, the man hours and the money and the time and the potential for, like I said, I could go to my kid's soccer game. I could play a round of golf this morning. I could have actually had breakfast with my wife. Whatever the case may be, I think if we fundamentally stop wasting everybody's time, and when we're going to sail, just go for it, I think that's a good start. I think it doesn't seem like a breakthrough start, but I think it's a good start.
What about you, Kenny? A man that's given so much of his life to sailing. I mean, I remember meeting you straight off the boat at the end of the Fastnet race a few years back. You just sailed Comanche to line honours. You know, dawn, it was just dawn, wasn't it? You finished in the dark and you arrived in Plymouth at dawn. And you were immediately rushing off to your daughter's graduation. Yeah. You know, from skipper to dad mode at the flick of a switch. How much has sailing been your whole life?
Well, it's been my whole life. It's had its consequences, you know, with personal lives too. You know, it's tough. It's not all perfect. There's no question about that. My daughter, obviously, all of our kids are the most important things in our life. She now graduated from college, and not to make you feel old, she's graduated from college and has a job out in California, you know, and of course in the environmental world, she's going to save the world, of which she reminds me constantly, the world that we have screwed up, that her generation is going to fix. She's not the only young person saying that, I might add. Yeah, it's hard, isn't it, to prioritize our lives, because we were given a gift, right? And we had to utilize that gift, especially while we have the time. And no question, it takes a toll on family and loved ones, and you don't make the best moves sometimes. But the good news is, I think if it's done properly, all's well that ends well. And fortunately, we have an amazing kid who I'm exceptionally proud of, and you know, we've still got a bunch of years. I kind of sound like I'm wrapping it up, so to speak, but I still got I got plenty to do here still, and I'm still I love what I'm doing, and I think we have some good things, more good things to come for sure.
Would you do anything differently looking back?
Oh, of course, yeah. Hindsight is a wonderful ally, but it's also your worst enemy, of course. But you know what? You are where you are, and where I am right now is downright phenomenal. You know, I have a great home life. I have a great job, a great home life, a great group of friends. It's and this sport is still tough to handle and a challenge every day, and something that I enjoy.
That's a great Kenny Reid soundbite to end on. Thank you.
My pleasure. Always a pleasure.
He's such a good communicator. I could listen to Kenny all day. I hope you enjoyed it, all 90 minutes. It's been a whopper. Next month, we're heading to Cagliari in Sardinia, home of the Italian America's Cup team Luna Rossa. Our guest will be one of my all-time favourite interviews. He's punchy, edgy, sometimes abrasive. He adds drama and entertainment to even the dullest of press conferences. But he's far from all bluster. Australian Jimmy Spithill has skippered his team to 3 America's Cup victories. He knows what it takes to deliver when the stakes are high. And although to the outside world it can seem like he's pumping his chest, if you're in his world, part of his team, his loyalty and positiveness is legendary. Jimmy Spithill is complex. Fact. It's going to be good. Please let me know what you think about the podcast. I'm easy to find at Shirley Sale on Instagram and Twitter, or just me on Facebook. And please do remember to like and review on whatever platform you're joining us on. As ever, the podcast is produced by Tim at Vertigo Films. A huge thanks for all his hard work and his attention to detail. We really strive to bring you a high quality listen. Until next time, thank you so much for listening. Have fun on the water. Sail safe, everyone.
This is Castle 1. Race officer speaking.
Pressure coming here, pressure coming.
We're 1.5 below.
Stand by, 2 dives here, boys.
We're looking at 10.5 and 42. This is Castle 1 standing by. Out.